It was December 31st, 2007, New Year's Eve. While millions of Americans prepared to celebrate 2008 with champagne and hope, two teenage sisters in Louisville, Texas, were doing something very different, writing farewell letters. Amina Said, 18, scribbled on paper with trembling hands, "If something happens to me, it was my father." Sarah, 17, whispered into the phone to her sister's boyfriend, "He's going to kill us. I know he will." 24 hours later, at 7:33 p.m. on January 1st, Sarah's desperate voice would cut through the silence in Irving. "Help! My dad shot me! I'm dying! I'm dying!" 9 gunshots exploded inside a yellow taxi. The phone fell to the blood-soaked floor. From the driver's seat, Yasser Abdul Saeed watched his daughters die as if completing a routine task. But why would a father execute his own daughters on the night that should symbolize a new beginning? Why did they know they were going to die? And most disturbing, why couldn't anyone stop him, even knowing this was going to happen? Pause this video for a moment. If you have daughters, sisters, nieces, or if you yourself are a young woman, this story will affect you in ways you might not expect. I'm not telling this for sensationalism. I'm telling it because what happened to Amina and Sarah Said in 2008 continues happening today in 2025 to young women around the world. Every 11 minutes, a woman is killed by domestic violence in the United States. But how many of those deaths are masked as cultural issues or family traditions? How many times do we hear, "He's from a different culture," as if that justified the unjustifiable? Now I want you to do something. Write in the comments where you're watching from. City, country, continent. Because when you finish seeing how many places in the world this story has reached, you'll understand that femicide has no nationality, no religion, no social class. And recognizing the signs can be the difference between life and death for someone you know. During the next few minutes, you'll discover that all the signs were there. Teachers knew, neighbors knew, authorities knew, and yet 2 brilliant girls died because an entire system failed to protect them. Imagine an 18-year-old girl, dark eyes shining with intelligence, always with her hand raised in class. Amina was captain of the debate team, had excellent grades, and dreamed of being a doctor. She spoke 3 languages, wrote poetry, and had that type of magnetic personality that attracted people. Her teachers described her as destined for greatness. But there was something her classmates didn't know. Amina lived 2 completely different lives. At school, she was the confident American teenager. At home, she was a prisoner who walked on tiptoes, measuring every word, every gesture, every breath. Sarah was the opposite of her sister in temperament, but equal in brilliance. Where Amina was fire, Sarah was water. Gentle, empathetic, she spent hours helping classmates with difficulties. She wanted to be an elementary school teacher because little children still believe they can change the world. She was 17 years old and had a smile that lit up rooms. What makes this story even more devastating is that both were American-born. They grew up hearing about freedom, equal rights, the pursuit of happiness. They recited the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. But inside their own home, they lived under a dictatorship that would make historical tyrants proud. Yasser wasn't just a strict father or a traditional man. He was a psychological predator who had transformed domestic terrorism into refined art. He came from Egypt in the 80s, but never let Egypt leave him. At 30, he married 15-year-old Patricia Owens, a union that today would be classified as abuse of a minor. He worked as a taxi driver, but his true profession was domestic espionage. Hidden cameras, wiretapped phones, following his daughters in his own taxi. He kept dossiers on their every movement, every conversation, every smile, and always carried a .38 caliber pistol. But here's what makes everything more sinister. Yasser wasn't protecting family honor. He was protecting much darker secrets. In 1998, when Amina was 9 and Sarah was 8, both accused their father of sexual abuse. The accusations were withdrawn after family pressure. The case was closed. The predator remained free. And you still don't know the worst part. In the girls' final days, Yasser wasn't just planning to kill them. He was planning how to disappear afterward. He already had escape routes, false documents, and a support network that would keep him hidden for more than a decade. The question that will haunt you is, how many people knew and chose to stay silent? The Said house in Louisville looked perfect from the outside. Well-kept lawn, white fence, American flag on the porch. Inside, it was a high-tech prison disguised as a home. Yasser had installed cameras in every room, including the girls' bedrooms. He recorded phone conversations, monitored emails, and followed his daughters in his yellow taxi like a professional stalker. The rules were simple and deadly. No contact with boys, no parties, no friends not approved by him. Any smile at a male classmate resulted in beatings. The girls couldn't wear makeup, Western clothes, or participate in extracurricular activities without supervision. Yasser locked them home on weekends, checked their backpacks daily, and read their intimate diaries. In 1998, when Amina was 9 and Sarah was 8, they did something extraordinarily brave for such young children. They reported sexual abuse by their father. Child Protective Services were called. Investigations began. But within weeks, both changed their minds and withdrew the accusations. Family pressure had worked. The case was filed as unsubstantiated allegations. Yasser always carried a .38 caliber pistol and didn't care that his daughters knew it. He left the gun on the table during dinner as a silent reminder. "If you dishonor me," he said, looking into their eyes, "I'll put a bullet in each of your heads, and then I'll kill myself too." These weren't empty threats. They were promises from a man who had lost any connection to humanity. Joseph Moreno was everything Yasser hated: American, Catholic, gentle, and genuinely in love with Amina. At 17, Joseph represented the future Amina dreamed of: freedom, respect, a life where she could be herself without fear. They met at school and for months kept their relationship in absolute secrecy. Amina created elaborate codes to communicate with Joseph. She used library computers to send emails, met him only in public places and never for more than a few minutes. She knew discovery meant death, not metaphorically, literally. "My father will kill me if he finds out," she told Joseph repeatedly, "and he'll kill you too." But in a family where privacy didn't exist, secrets were temporary. Yasser discovered text messages on Amina's phone. His reaction was explosive and calculated at the same time. First, he beat Amina until she fainted. Then he said something that froze the young woman's blood. "Now I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to kill Sarah too, so she learns what happens when a sister dishonors the family." From that moment, Yasser began planning methodically. He bought extra ammunition, studied escape routes, talked to relatives about cleaning family honor. Sarah, who had never even dated, was on the execution list simply for being Amina's sister. In Yasser's twisted mind, both needed to die for honor to be restored. Joseph noticed the change in Amina immediately. She arrived at school with bruises disguised by makeup, whispered on the phone afraid of being heard, began talking about fleeing to another state. "He's not just angry," she told Joseph. "He's different, like he's already decided what he's going to do." In December 2007, Patricia Owens made the bravest decision of her life: help her daughters escape. After years of being a victim of the same man, she finally recognized that Yasser would really kill them. On a cold morning, while Yasser worked, Patricia packed some clothes, picked up the girls from school, and drove 350 miles to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Ruth Troder, a longtime family friend, had offered shelter. Her modest home became the first safe place Amina and Sarah had ever known in their lives. For the first time in 18 and 17 years respectively, they laughed without looking over their shoulders. Sarah played with the family dog. Amina talked on the phone with Joseph for hours, making college plans. "I never saw the girls smile like that," Ruth remembered years later. "It was like they had just gotten out of prison." Amina said she wanted to study medicine to help other women in abusive situations. Sarah talked about being a teacher and teaching children about human rights. They had hope for the first time. The girls were enrolled in local school under false names. Amina got a part-time job at a store. Sarah volunteered at a daycare. For 5 magical days they experienced normal life. They made future plans, talked about college, even laughed at silly movies on TV. But 350 miles away, Yasser had discovered their whereabouts, and he began a psychological campaign that would last days. Constant calls to Patricia, crying, begging, promising change. "I just want to talk to my daughters," he said. "I just want to ask for forgiveness." Patricia, after 20 years of manipulation, began believing him again. Yasser's calls to Patricia began on the second day of escape. First, anger. "How can you take my daughters from me?" Then, theatrical despair. "I can't live without them. They are my life." Finally, the promise of redemption. "I've changed. I swear by Allah, I've changed. I just want a chance to ask for forgiveness." Patricia, who had spent 2 decades being a victim of the same man, had no psychological defenses against his manipulation. Yasser knew every weakness of hers, every insecurity, every fear. He said he was seeing a psychologist. He promised they would go to family therapy. He swore he would never touch the girls again. Amina sensed the change in her mother immediately. Patricia stopped making permanent plans, began talking about giving Dad a chance, and suggested maybe they could talk with Yasser. "Mom, if we go back, he'll kill us," Amina said directly. "You know that." But Patricia was again under the spell of the man who had controlled her since she was 15. On December 30th, Patricia announced they were returning to Texas. Not to stay, she said, just to visit grandmother's grave and talk civilly with Yasser. Amina protested violently, but Sarah, always more optimistic, thought maybe their father had really changed. The return trip was tense. Amina absolutely refused to sleep at her father's house and stayed with friend Eddie. Sarah went home with her mother. On the night of December 31st, Yasser suggested a reconciliation dinner for New Year's. Patricia managed to convince Amina to participate. "Just dinner, then we can leave again." Amina called Joseph on the morning of January 1st. "Something's wrong, he's too calm, I don't want to go to this dinner." Those were her last words to her boyfriend. At 3 p.m. she got into her father's taxi. At 7:33 p.m. she was dying in the back seat. January 1st, 2008 dawned cold and grey in Texas. While the country woke up hungover and making New Year's resolutions, Yasser Abdul Said woke up with a singular purpose: kill his daughters. He didn't take his usual taxi. He borrowed one from another driver, a detail showing coldly calculated premeditation. At 3 p.m., Yasser picked up the girls, saying they would go to a special restaurant to start the year in peace. There was no conversation on the way. Sarah tried a few times to break the awkward silence, but Yasser only mumbled monosyllabic responses. Amina, sitting behind him, watched her father's every movement in the rearview mirror. Instead of a restaurant, Yasser drove to the Hotel Omni Mandalay parking lot in Irving. It was an isolated location, away from security cameras, where screams wouldn't be heard. He parked the taxi in a fire lane, another detail showing how he had planned everything, including the quick escape route. What happened in the following minutes was reconstructed through Sarah's 911 call, forensic evidence, and testimonies. Yasser drew his .38 caliber pistol and turned toward his daughters. Sarah realized first what was going to happen and managed to dial 911. "Help! My dad shot me. I'm dying. I'm dying," she screamed with a clear and desperate voice. The shots exploded inside the taxi. Amina took 2 shots, one in the chest and another indicating she tried to protect herself or her sister. Sarah was hit 9 times, indicating methodical execution. Yasser didn't shoot on impulse. He kept shooting until he was sure both were dead. Then he calmly walked out of the vehicle and disappeared into the cold January night. When police arrived at the Hotel Omni Mandalay, 8 minutes after the 911 call, they found a scene that would traumatize veteran investigators. The yellow taxi was parked in a fire lane, doors unlocked, engine still warm. In the back seat, Amina Said was curved over her sister's body, as if she had used her last seconds of life trying to protect her. Sarah lay with the phone still in her hand, blood covering the beige leather seat. 9 projectiles hit her in the chest and abdomen. Amina had 2 perforations, including one in the cardiac region. Forensic examination determined both died in less than 2 minutes, but enough time for Sarah to name the killer in a call that would become the most important evidence in the case. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence that the victims tried to flee the vehicle. The execution was quick, efficient, and completely one-sided. Yasser didn't leave the weapon at the scene. He took it with him, along with any pretense of innocence he might claim later. In less than an hour, an arrest warrant for double-qualified homicide was issued against Yasser Abdul Said, but he had already completely disappeared, beginning one of the most successful escapes in American criminal history. Airports were notified, borders alerted, the family home surrounded, all useless. The initial investigation revealed that Yasser always carried large amounts of cash, never used bank cards, and deeply distrusted trackable technology. He had been preparing for this escape for years, like a professional criminal planning the perfect crime. Patricia Owens, when interrogated, revealed disturbing details. Yasser had talked about disappearing if things got bad. He kept documents under false names, knew routes through Texas and New Mexico deserts, and had contacts in the Arab-American community who could help him. It wasn't impulse, it was the plan of a predator who always knew that one day he would need to flee. The manhunt for Yasser Abdul Said became one of the longest and most frustrating pursuits in FBI history. During the first months, Federal agents followed hundreds of false leads. Sightings in Detroit, supposed connections in New York, rumors he had fled to Egypt. All proved fruitless. In 2014, 6 years after the murders, the FBI made an extraordinary decision. They placed Yasser on the 10 most wanted fugitives list, alongside international terrorists and cartel bosses. A $100,000 reward was offered. His photo appeared in airports, police stations, and TV programs across the country. The America's Most Wanted program featured the case multiple times. Billboards were erected in Texas, Oklahoma, and neighboring states. CNN, Fox News, and NBC produced special documentaries. The story of the Said sisters became a symbol of the fight against domestic violence disguised as honor crimes. But Yasser remained a ghost. What investigators didn't know was that he had never left Texas. For 12 years, he lived hidden in relatives' and sympathizers' homes, moving like a nomad between backrooms, improvised attics, and converted garages. His son Islam and his brother Yassin orchestrated the clandestine operation with military precision. They transported food, medicine, and supplies to different hideouts. Yassin even bought properties under false names, specifically to shelter the fugitive. Islam monitored news about the investigation and warned about police operations. The support network worked because Yasser had convinced his accomplices that he was a wronged father, persecuted by a system that didn't understand his culture. Some really believed the narrative, others were simply afraid of him. But everyone knew they were helping a killer escape justice. In phone intercepts from later years, Islam was recorded saying, "He'll never go to prison. They'll never catch him." The arrogance was palpable. They really believed they had beaten the system. When Yasser Abdul Said finally sat in the defendant's chair in August 2022, he looked like a man broken by time. Grey hair, curved posture, empty stare, very different from the tyrant who terrorized his family for decades. But his fragile appearance didn't fool anyone in the courtroom. The public prosecutor presented a devastatingly simple case. A man had executed his own daughters because they dared to be American. The evidence was irrefutable. Sarah's 911 call, clear, desperate, specific. Yasser's immediate escape, the 12 years as a fugitive. There was no plausible defense. Joseph Moreno, now a 30-year-old man, testified about the terror Amina lived with daily. With a choked voice, he read messages she sent. "He said he's going to kill me, and kill Sarah too. Joseph, I'm so scared." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Ruth Troder described the 5 days the girls spent at her house, the only free days of their entire lives. "They were like birds that had just left their cage," she testified. "For the first time, I saw hope in their eyes." The defense tried to argue that direct physical evidence linking Yasser to the shootings was lacking. It was a desperate strategy that crumbled when the prosecution played Sarah's 911 call. Her voice, clear as crystal, named the killer. "My dad shot me." Patricia Owens, now a woman destroyed by remorse, confirmed years of abuse and threats. She admitted she knew returning to Texas could be a death sentence for her daughters. Her testimony was devastating, not just for Yasser, but for herself. Yasser never testified, never showed remorse. When the guilty verdict was read, he remained impassive. Sentence: life imprisonment without possibility of parole. At 65, he would die in prison. Justice finally served, but 2 decades too late. Today, 17 years after the murders, Amina Said would be 35 years old. She would probably be a doctor, saving lives instead of having her own brutally interrupted. Sarah would be 34, perhaps teaching children about tolerance and human rights. They could have had children, careers, realized dreams. Everything was stolen from them by a man who confused control with love, terror with tradition. This case exposed the failure of a system that failed to protect 2 girls whose cries for help were repeatedly ignored. Teachers who suspected, neighbors who heard screams, authorities who filed away reports. How many lost opportunities? How many lives could have been saved? The story of the Said sisters became a global symbol of the fight against domestic violence, masked as cultural honor. Their deaths were not in vain if they serve as a warning. Recognizing the signs can save lives. Violence is never cultural, it's crime, period. Yasser Abdul Said is serving life imprisonment at the John B. Connolly unit in Kennedy, Texas. At 66, he will wake up every day knowing he destroyed not only his daughters' lives, but also his own soul. Islam and Yassin also serve federal sentences for obstruction of justice. Share this story. Talk about it at home, at work, in schools. Teach your children that true love never hurts, never controls, never kills. If you know someone in an abusive situation, don't stay silent. One call can save a life. Amina and Sarah can no longer speak for themselves. But their voices echo through every person who refuses to normalize violence, who challenges narratives about traditions that kill women. They deserve to be remembered not just as victims, but as symbols of courage that continue inspiring necessary changes in the world.